awake, aware.
And I was just kind of curious, I know your main thing is kind of filmmaking. Is that kind of what you would consider yourself primarily as a filmmaker as far as, your what you like to do, and how did you get into doing it?
Yeah, no, good question. I'm finding it harder and harder these days to call myself just a filmmaker. I feel like
Yeah.
there's a lot more going on, and just the format itself feels limiting to me in some ways. Just this linear, two-dimensional screen, um, and the ideas that I want to explore tend to go way outside of those bounds. But it's still the one thing that gets people's attention, and which is one of the reasons I got into filmmaking after reading Jim Morrison's biography
Mm.
and hearing about his early days in film school and the emotion that came up with one of his early projects and the response that he got just grabbed me and made my kind of hair stand up on the back of my neck. And I was so impressed and amazed with how you could draw people's emotions into something. With Jim's stuff, it was very confrontational. It was about Nazis and sadomasochism, which is a totally
Mm.
different thing. But to see how he was treated by his classmates and how people got so riled up, I was like, man, if you can do that for the negative side, you could also do that for the positive side. And how can you do that same sort of thing and elicit these responses and get people interested? And film was the way to do that. And so that's how I kind of had it dropped in my head that I wanted to do filmmaking, and then went down that route. But these days, it's covering everything from consulting to um, just philosophizing in general. A lot of these ideas and things, like I said, they're big chunks to take off and chew on. And so a lot of times it's a combination of, are we doing media work? Is it communication? Is it just philosophy? So any number of things. Yeah, I'm really
Yeah.
fascinated by human consciousness. That's the main thing.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
That's interesting what you're talking about there with, being able to affect people's emotions and stuff with film. And that's something I've been, noticing for the past handful of years. I guess magic, for lack of a better term, there
Mm,
is in like advertising and film and television. And I'm sure there's been plenty of inspirational and positive sort of stuff throughout the years, but it seems like, for example, like drug commercials where they'll show somebody's body and they'll show like some red part with, little lightning bolt kind of things, and then they'll show the drug, and then they'll show a nice cool energy and like a flowing thing. And it's just sort of this way of getting in people's, subconscious and kind of like inspiring a certain feeling or thought or emotion. And, um, it just seems like people, um, kind of younger people and people that are into, consciousness and spirituality, for a lack of a better term, are sort of realizing they can harness this same sort of, power to
yeah.
influence things in a positive direction. And so that seems to be, from what I'm hearing, kind of like what excited you and what you kind of try to do in your
Absolutely.
work.
Absolutely. I mean, looking at the advertising world, they've spent billions of dollars over the years, and in some ways, probably more than the government, really trying to figure out how to get in your brain and sell you a product. And Marshall McLuhan was a great researcher that looked into a lot of that early on with advertising, and it's been very effective. And I think a lot of people now are starting to, the audiences are kind of waking up to it a little bit. So they're a little more aware of, okay, I'm being targeted right now, and I can kind of tune this out. Where in the past, that stuff was just kind of flowing in, and people were taking it for God's truth, and it was working very effectively. But it still can have a big impact, and if we can use it in a negative way, then we should be able to use it in a positive way to hopefully at least get people to start questioning what's going on around them.
Definitely.
Mm.
Um, so what was your experience with film school? Like, you went to school for film. What was that
I
experience?
did. Yeah. So I went to the University of Texas for my undergrad and studied filmmaking and communications theory there. It was amazing. I don't think now looking back that I would have necessarily had to go to film school to be
Mm.
a filmmaker. And so I like to tell other filmmakers that are looking to get into this industry that it's not necessary.
Yeah.
At the same time, there were a lot of great benefits to that, being able to work in teams of small groups and explore on such a level that sometimes if you're working outside of that to begin, it can be challenging in many ways to make mistakes and fall, but then get back up and try something different. And then I did graduate work at NYU, which is a little more focused on the technology side because I felt like I kind of got the filmmaking, and I also saw early on that filmmaking is changing as we know it because of the internet, and then the way that we're watching videos and consuming media is drastically different than it was. And so I wanted to have a little bit of that stuff in my tool belt as well, and glad that I was able to go do that. I still just love the medium. If you have a really solid film, it can change a lot of people's minds and not just entertain, but get them to think differently.
Yeah. What do you think about the balance between, like accurately portraying something in sort of a non-biased way and like overly dramatizing something to the point where, you're kind of exaggerating to a point that's
Sure.
maybe not realistic, because I think there is importance to like keeping it somewhat balanced maybe because you don't want to go too far the other way and act like, oh, this thing is just the answer to everything.
Right.
Whether that be ayahuasca or DMT or some other, just anything really. But yeah, how do you strike a balance there?
Yeah, well, I guess to start with, I would say that all documentary filmmaking is biased. I don't
Yeah.
care how much it looks like it's not, it is biased because
Yeah.
you have people that are constructing the story or at least starting down a particular path. And then even how it's edited is going to impact what people are seeing and how they're perceiving it. At the same time, I get your point, and it is a challenge, particularly with mind-altering chemicals, especially something that's illegal and that has such a big experience and impact on people like DMT. So how do you do that without overdoing it and making it a little sensational? I think in some ways we tried to really have the balance, although we only talked to people that were on the psychedelic side in many ways. We did try to reach out to government officials and others that were involved in the study of Rick Strassman's work, but nobody wanted to talk to us. And so that told me a lot right there. And I just said, well, we're going to go make the film that is going to come to us. And hopefully we didn't over dramatize that too much or make it too sensational. I think we kind of touched a good point for everybody, but those are things that I definitely take into account and think like, as an audience member, as a filmmaker, how do I get this out to the widest audience possible? At least that's my goal when I'm putting something together. It can be very easy to quote unquote preach to the choir, make something that's going to be just for them, or go the other way. But if I had to speak to as many people as possible, what would that look like? And so that's constantly in my mind as the director and producer, but also, my editor, I give her so much credit because she makes me look so good. She's a really amazing editor and finding that narrative, in the midst of this huge haystack. And she's very aware of that as well. It's like, how do we make this so it's not too psychedelic, especially the DMT one, which could be a challenge, but also something that people can resonate with and empathize with and say, oh, I get where you're coming from. I may not agree with it, but I get where you're coming from, or at least I can listen to it without just shutting it off immediately.
Totally.
So it's in my mind. It's something that we are thinking about, but again, all that media is biased. I don't care where it's coming from.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, I certainly don't think the work I've seen from you is sensationalized to, a point where it's, or really at all. But I think about that in general, whether it comes to even things like, documentaries about diet, like you'll have a vegan documentary and then you'll have a carnivore documentary or whatever. And everybody, kind of has this feeling that they've found the answer, which is understandable because people are just exploring so many new things and kind of looking for their own authority rather than looking to somebody else's. And so people are getting really excited when they find something that works for them and kind of want to really just get it out there. So I was just curious, from the standpoint of somebody who's out there making stuff and making films and kind of encountering those different things. But to jump into to some of your work, I think DMT, the spirit molecule, might be what, you know, most people would know put you on the map there. I guess what inspired you, how did that idea come to?
Yeah.
And yeah, what was sort of the journey of trying to create that?
Well, a long story short was that it was a DMT experience.
Yeah.
I had tried psychedelics from an early age and had kind of early on it was very frivolous. We were just out at parties. It was pretty stupid. It wasn't a self-development or spiritual aspect to why we were taking those.
Yep.
And it was mainly LSD and mushrooms. And then when I got to grad school, right before my last year, a friend of mine was moving back to Brazil, and he said, "Hey, a group of us are getting together. You should come over tonight. It's going to be a special night." That's all he said. Showed up there, and somebody had brought some DMT. I had never heard of DMT. And kind of just played it off like, "Yeah, I know what I'm doing. I've done this." And the guy just kind of laughed and looked at me, and he's like, "Do you want to take it or not?" And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." And I was the third one to take it. And I remember after the second inhalation, I started to exhale, and everything started to change very rapidly, which was very alarming for me. I didn't expect that quick of a come on. And then the materials in the room, the physical matter turned into atoms. I could still see the structures that they were, but it wasn't what I was seeing. And then it was just like a flip, and I started getting pulled what felt down a wormhole or some sort of like transport, and just having all this information coming by me. And the thought that registered in my head at the time was, I'm dying. This is what it's like to die. And oh shit, like my parents are going to find out. This is horrible. And so the guy administrating said, I'd never seen a look of fear on somebody's face like I did on yours for the first couple minutes. And I can't really comprehend, because my cognitive dissonance was so warped and wrapped, and I was all over the place. I remember being frightened early on, but then I settled into it, and it was one of the most beautiful experiences I had ever seen in my life. And at that roughly 10-minute mark, I guess, I started coming back into my body and back into the room. And one of the first things I remember coming into my head was, "You're going to make a movie about this." And I didn't know what that was. I didn't know it was DMT, the spirit molecule. I didn't know anything about this. But something so profound that it just resonated with me, like, this is what you're going to do. It's the only substance I'd put in my body to that date that I did not want to try again. I didn't have any interest in trying it again until I figured out some more of what was going on and what the heck it was. So I spent about 4 years doing as much research as I could, and then came across Dr. Strassman's book during that time and immediately ordered it. And when I read it, I thought, this was the way to tell the story. This is the way to bring the documentary forward, with the science and the spiritual part. Because originally, once I came back, it's like, oh, this is going to be the trippiest documentary ever made. And once I contacted Dr. Strassman, and he was open to doing it, and we started doing the interviews, I realized it was going to be a lot different, in something much more than just a trippy documentary.
Yeah.
And so we started shooting in 2007, and it took us about 5 years to put the whole project together. Wow. Somebody told me early on, like, "Oh, you're making an independent doc. It's going to take you 5 years at least." And I just kind of laughed again, and like, no, I'll do it, a couple of years max. And sure enough, it was a 5-year process. And I think that's pretty common for independent documentaries. So, but it was an amazing experience. I learned so much during the process. I felt like I got an entirely new degree sitting down and interviewing 50 brilliant people that have just been pushing forward in many different kind of areas of research. And then even sitting down and talking to the subjects from Dr. Strassman's study was absolutely amazing to hear them come back 10 years later and start to recount their experiences and what they've meant for them in their lives at the same time.
It sounds like the process of researching and making the film was sort of like an integration process of that first experience.
Yes, I think that's exactly what it was. There was a complete restructuring of my understanding of reality. I don't think that I understand reality, or that I've totally got there.
Right.
At the same time, everything that I thought I knew was completely out the window in a 10-minute experience.
Yeah.
So It definitely was an integration process, and I think I needed that 4 years to kind of chew on some of that stuff. So.
Yeah. What was it like getting Joe Rogan involved in that?
Well, first of all, Joe was great, and I thank him again because he came out and gave us his time for free because he believed in
Oh
the
wow.
project, believed in Dr. Strassman's work, and that's how I was connected to Joe. But we had a great time. I don't think Joe. I don't think he knew early on that I wanted to make these Twilight Zone kind of interstitials to have him in. And I said, "Hey, I need the measurements to put you in a suit." And he said, "A suit? I don't wear suits. I don't even know what a suit is." We got all his measurements though, and he got there and put it all on. And he's a big guy, obviously.
Yeah.
And once he tried to button up the shirt, it wasn't going to work. The tie wasn't going to work. I was like, well, let's just loosen it up. Let's make it a little more casual. So, but he was wonderful. We had a great time on set. And well, again, just thank him very much for being a part of it because I think a lot of people came to the film because of Joe. And I think that's helped get it out there and have people see it. So again, one of those little things like how can we expand this audience beyond just the typical psychedelic audience?
Yeah, super cool. Yeah, it's kind of interesting how things seem to converge in that way for that film, like Strassman's work and just DMT in general was starting to kind of get into people's minds and getting Joe Rogan in there, and it just kind of all came together to create a pretty, kind of like a cultural phenomenon. Um, so now after it's been, all this time, like looking back on the documentary, how do you feel about it? And I I think I heard you say on an episode of Future Sense that we might be expecting a sequel. Is that right?
That's it. Yeah. So I can't believe this, but it'll be 10 years coming up in 2021 and since we've released the documentary.
Dang.
And it just feels like so long ago, but it's been amazing. And when I first made that film, I was like, I'm not going to make another psychedelic documentary. I'm done. I've got other stories I want to tell. And so that's been my mentality, right? And my producer has been bugging me for years. He's like, man, probably need to make another one or do something else that's, similar. And this year we kind of circled back around on that. And he said, hey, we're going to be coming up on the 10-year mark. What do you think about doing an updated version? A lot's changed. A lot of different stuff is happening. The research is expanding. And so we came up with a concept of DMT, the conscious molecule. And we're in the process of starting to pitch that around and trying to find some funding to go shoot that. Hopefully we'll get going on that this next year. And the concept behind that is looking at universal consciousness, that the whole universe is conscious. And there's a lot of research from different areas that's kind of starting to point to this. And when I say everything, I mean everything, not just us, not just the universe, but all the way down to the smallest building blocks have some form of consciousness.
Yeah.
And then I'm feeling like, DMT ties into that in some ways because of the intelligence and the entity aspect of the experience, that people have a very common experience of at least having some sort of information scape there, whether or not that, there's entities, but there's some sort of information embedded in that. And I think that's the case beyond just DMT, but DMT being a nice connector, particularly with this. That's where we're going to jump it off and looking at panpsychism, holographic universe. What would it mean if the entire universe is conscious and we were just elements of that consciousness experiencing consciousness? Fascinating stuff.
Right. And does that mean that, maybe some of the information or insights that you can get on some of these types of experiences is like, is all sort of a knowledge and information that is possible already contained within just consciousness itself,
Exactly.
and DMT is some sort of ability to kind of access that, like Akashic records kind of a vibe or whatever.
That's exactly what I'm feeling. Like, that I think this information is there. Our perception as human beings is so limited. Our electromagnetic spectrum, we see a sliver of that. We only hear certain sound frequencies. And there are countless other things that are pouring through us at all times that we just aren't consciously aware of. And I'm thinking, like, if the universe has been evolving for 14 billion years and coming from a simple, atom of hydrogen and growing in complexity into complex thinking beings, that the information that is stored is, well, we'd never be able to wrap our minds around it.
Right. Yeah.
But we can get glimmers of it, or we can get little insights by these compounds that open that kind of the gateway, if you will, and remove a lot of the filters that we have on top of our normal day-to-day operating consciousness.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like in the same way, people can get, insights or premonitions in dreams. And I know there's potentially a link between, was it ever confirmed that DMT is released in sleep? Or
Has not been confirmed, but that is definitely one of the thought, some of the theory out there is that is a time that it does get released.
have you ever had an experience where, as you're falling asleep, you feel like you have similar feelings that you're about to trip on DMT?
Yeah, and it's interesting. Even before I even touched psychedelics, I had a lot of mystical experiences and outer body experiences, and strange things happened to me when I was younger. That parents ended up taking me to the psychiatrist for, but it wasn't anything except for I was having full-on experiences when I was going to bed, and sometimes it was that in-between state where you're either like a sleep paralysis where you're wide awake and you're conscious, but you can't move your body and things are in the room, or just being hyper aware within the dream state, kind of like a waking dream, but you're able to like understand, I am me, I'm navigating this, something's going on that's way different than what I'm used to.
Yeah.
And after the DMT experience, the first time, a lot of those experiences made sense. They just kind of resonated differently.
Yeah. Yeah, I asked that because after having done DMT, I don't remember ever experiencing it before, but I've experienced a few different times where I become conscious of myself falling asleep, and sorry, I'm having an issue with my microphone.
Oh yeah.
Here. Conscious as I'm falling asleep, and it's just a very similar feeling, sort of that wormhole kind of thing you're talking about, and the rush of what feels like information or things kind of like almost flying past you, and then sort of that opening into the expanse, kind of a culmination, But
absolutely.
So something I've been curious about, just thinking about DMT and talking to somebody who made an entire documentary about it. We know obviously DMT is one of the active compounds in ayahuasca, and ayahuasca is, been shown to have a lot of different healing properties. How do you feel about, smokable DMT? And since it's such a short experience, personally feel that smoking DMT can have healing properties?
I think it can, but I think having the ayahuasca, for a couple reasons, can be more healing in some ways. For one, you have the ayahuasca vine, which has different compounds in it beyond just the pure DMT, and I think those are the elements that actually have a lot of the healing qualities that people talk about. So I think having the ayahuasca vine and those other compounds is important. And also the fact that the experience is stretched out to a 4 to 6 hour experience, you can navigate that space a little differently. You can have the conversations with yourself as opposed to the vaporized or smokable DMT, where you're blasted out within 30 seconds, and then you're back in 10 minutes or whatever it is. Most of the time, you're just trying to hold on and go, what the hell is happening here? Yeah. That's about as much as the thought you can form. But again, with the ayahuasca, there's more time to kind of uncover, play with, ask questions, explore. And also you can remember those experiences the next day and weeks later. And I think that integration process can be a little deeper. I do think that there is something though to just superior DMT. I've had raging migraines for years, and if I don't do a full dose of DMT, but if you just do a small little bit, enough to just kind of relax the body, I can get rid of my migraines in a flash.
Interesting.
And I think there's other aspects that we'll start to see that DMT can actually be used for beyond just going for the big psychedelic heroic dose. Yeah.
Can you hold on one second?
Sure.
Sorry about that.
No
Give me
worries.
1 second. I think my computer's kind of overheating. I need to grab something.
Oh, okay. Put some ice on it.
All right. All right. Thanks for that.
You bet.
Yeah, I know that so uh, are you hearing that? Is my mic cutting out to you, or
It did a
might?
couple times earlier, but I haven't heard anything since.
Okay, might just be in my headphones here. Um, so I have pretty limited DMT experience actually. I've only had one experience. It was, I think, 5 years ago now, actually.
Okay.
And I feel like it's been sort of a long process of really kind of trying to integrate, how much it blew me away. Um, it was an extremely positive experience. I mean, I would say probably the most positive experience of my entire life.
Mm-hmm.
Very much followed the format of what your experience sounded like, your first one. Starting out extremely intense and really terrifying, I guess,
Yeah.
but so intense so quickly that I didn't even really have time to be like consciously afraid. It was more of just an immediate like,
Hold on.
yeah, exactly.
I'm going for a ride.
But a couple things the reason partially why I asked about the healing is there was a couple things that I noticed that seemed interesting. And I've heard this from some other people that have done it as well. One of those things is that that sort of rushing phase that um, I experienced, almost like it felt like things were being cleaned out, or like almost like negative thoughts were kind of flying past my head. Like the one word I remember was like moron for some reason. But it was like
Okay.
rushing past my head, and it was sort of like, and I also had the dying type experience, and it sort of culminated in this. It was like my body was aligning itself or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and once it was able to like align, that's when it sort of broke open into the like vastness, sort
Yeah.
of breakthrough space. And I don't know about your experience or research you've looked into or anything like that, but if other people, if it's a very common experience, but I've heard other people kind of experience this sort of like almost like a defrag of the hard drive. I've heard
Mhm.
people describe it as, or like it feels like there's something being like moved around, like get rid of this, get rid of that,
Mhm.
like kind of reordering things and realigning things. And I'm just curious, if you know about any of that, if you've experienced that, and
Yeah.
maybe how you would interpret that, or what you think of it.
Well, I like to look at it. First off, yes, I've had experiences like that, and what I think that is, DMT is unusual in the psychedelic world because there's a sense of motion to it, and I don't really know what that is, but you can feel like you're moving,
Mm,
which I think is part of that kind of like wiping clean. But I've been looking at how we experience reality, and if you just imagine when we're born, or even prior to being born, but let's just say when we're born, and we start getting taught what the world is like, and that's through the entire environment, whether that's our parents yelling at us, or whether that's falling down, hurting yourself, just the stories that we create from trauma that end
hmm
up influencing how our body moves and functions. And so over time, what that does is it takes kind of the template DNA, and then it slowly starts to build up this thing that we call a body and idea of self. But during that time, depending on what's happening to the individual, gravity and everything else, it affects how we're moving. It could, a trauma doesn't have to necessarily just be this negative thing that impacted your consciousness, but it also can influence your physical body, because I think that trauma is actually stored in our bodies as opposed to here in the mind as much.
Mm-hmm.
And what starts to happen, I think, with DMT is it kind of like wipes that template clean, and gets rid of all the extraneous little pieces of code that were out of alignment, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
My body tends to want to move and kind of flop when I'm on DMT, and I think it's kind of the same thing that's happening. Is like it's just adjusting itself. It may not look that great from the outside, but it feels absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And so I think to your point it's kind of like realigning those elements. It's moving the energy through there, and that just sounds a little new agey, but at the same time, I think our bodies, as they start to tighten down and crick and everything is working against itself, that stuff can open back up again from DMT.
Yeah. Another thing I had kind of, thought about is if DMT does get released during sleep, and if smoking DMT or drinking ayahuasca could be compared to something similar to like a conscious form of, entering into the sleep state. We know obviously there's tons of healing and reconfiguring that goes on during sleep,
Right. Yep.
And so that's something just kind of a side thing that I had wondered about, is if some of that sort of healing properties is more of just like a conscious form of things that happen during like a really deep restorative sleep.
I think you're onto something. Particularly, that's what we do. We process all the information kind of in the background while we're sleeping of our day or of whatever's been going on with us. So I think that's a great correlation. I think there's something there.
Yeah. So I brought up Steve McDonald earlier in Future Sense, and I've had Steve on the podcast now a couple times, and I've known Steve through a friend of mine, Bob Fisk, who I think
I know
you
Bob.
also
Yep,
know.
I know Bob.
Yep, Bob's one of my best friends. I've known him for years. So I love Steve's work and what he's doing, and it sounds like you're pretty interested in spiral dynamics, and he kind of turned you on to that type of stuff.
Did back in 2012, he introduced me to it, and I immediately was like, whoa, this is the most amazing stuff I've heard and experienced. So I've been digesting as much as I can from Mr. McDonald for the last 7 years.
Very cool. And it sounds like there's potentially a documentary series related to that work in the works.
That's it. We have been, since we got together in 2012, we had this idea of trying to put a single documentary together. And that's morphed a little bit over time. And we've now come to, and we think we're ready to start working on this, is a documentary series that's explaining human consciousness, not just through the spiral dynamics, although that's a good base point for us, but also how we're seeing the world in relation to human consciousness, how we are changing, trying to understand. The one thing that's a constant that I think that all humans can agree upon is that things change, but nobody wants change.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more we push back against it, which is always an interesting thing, but the more we push back against it, it becomes more challenging, or we just kind of get stuck. But I think a lot of people are looking around the world these days and saying, wow, the whole world's falling apart, and it feels like we're getting ready to collapse. And in some ways, I think there's an element of that. But I also think there's a lot of new things that are starting to rise up and take the place of some of these institutions and thoughts that have been part of our culture and our society for so long. But we're trying to just put a little context around things and let people know that, change is unfolding and things are happening. And even in this country, with the people in power right now, everything that they're doing, a lot of people are having a hard time with it, but what they're doing is they're tearing down the old system. And for me, that's okay. We need to get to a different place, and you can no longer hide all the atrocities and the negativity and the lies. So all the stuff that's going on, I think, is absolutely necessary, and it's just going to realign things in a totally different way.
Yeah, sort of a macrocosm of that clearing out of the DMT experience.
That's it. Time to deal with the shadows. It's time to deal with the shadows. Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the things that, can be hard, like for me personally, something that I've started to, trust more, but it can be difficult, I think, is just trusting that there is an intelligence to the process of change. and that, if you can trust and have faith, even if you don't know the destination, you know that the falling apart and the things, the difficulties and the challenges ultimately are going to lead to like a higher order, or, a new destination that's obviously not final, but there does seem to be some sort of stability for a while after you go through a big change, but trusting that there is some sort of, I guess, a lot of this stuff tends to sound new agey, but yeah, it's like, the universe is trying to achieve a state of harmony.
Right.
And so when you're in this dissonant state, the things need to fall apart and need to change, and you don't always know where you're headed, but it's like you're floating on a river and there's some turbulent spots. But if you trust that, if you've experienced it before, that you can get through these spots to, like, you're going to come out on the other side to a calm, harmonious spot with great views and all of this, then it makes it a little easier, maybe just take
Right.
the edge off. And so that's something that Spiral Dynamics, I think, can do. And just Claire Graves's work around just the change process in general. I'm wondering if you find the same thing to be true, and also just like, what about Spiral Dynamics inspires you? For people that don't know about it, they can go back and listen to my first episode with Steve McDonald. But I'd just love to hear more how you feel about it, why it's captivated you, and what you want to share about it.
Yeah, I think, to your first point about having kind of trust within this whole thing that it will unfold the way it's supposed to. That is a very hard thing to do. I think a lot of us struggle with that. But it's one thing I've been really trying to grasp and get my head around, and Steve's helped a lot with that, is having the trust and knowing that when things are starting to feel a little out of place, taking stock of what's happening in my life and looking at, okay, what needs to change or what could change that would help kind of guide me. And I used to have that mentality of like, well, I've got to be here. This is what happiness looks like. This is what contentment looks like. But that changes all the time too. So when you're aiming for a moving target, it's going to be hard to get to that destination. But coming back to the here and now and that kind of presence that a lot of mystics and stuff talk about, I think that we already have embedded in us exactly what we want out of life and what we need out of life. And we'll get to where we want to go without having to say, that's where I'm going, that the river is going to navigate me there. Again, that is not an easy thing. It's you can talk about it all day long, but in day-to-day life, when things pop up or somebody cuts you off or whatever it is, you're just like, oh. But the more that I'm able to do that and step out of my own way, the process is so much easier and so much more rewarding too, where it's just like, oh, things just start kind of falling into place without any control being inserted upon things. So it's getting kind of in that flow state that a lot of people have talked about. As for what really resonated with me or what really stuck out about Claire's work, Claire W. Graves' work, and then later to be known as Spiral Dynamics, was that I started seeing my own life in these different stages on how I was living, how I was responding, how I understood things. And so it, for the first time, kind of gave me some insights into my personal life. Like, wow, that's what's going on here. Oh, I see. And I understand why I did that or why I would have thought that or reacted that way. And so a lot of things just started to fall into place for me understanding my own life and my place within the universe or planet Earth or society. And that felt amazing because for my earliest memories, I've never really felt like I was from here. I didn't feel like it belonged. And to have that kind of aloneness or that kind of separateness was always a challenge for me. But once I started to see and put this stuff into context with the change process and with Spiral, it started to make a lot of sense. And it started to just release a lot of extra kind of talk that was going on in the back of my head, that we all have the voice or voices, whatever, that's telling you how great you are or how not great you are or how this is wrong or this is right. But it just kind of calmed up a lot of that, or cleared up a lot of that space and calmed those voices down to where there's a lot more time and space to go explore the things that I wanted to go explore and being myself. And it made so much sense for me that I was like, man, this is a roadmap for the future. This is a way to start giving people some insights into their own life. It's a little challenging because, according to Graves' theory, that until you kind of get to seventh layer of consciousness, you're not really able to see outside of your own perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you talk about this with people, most people are like, oh, I have no idea. But the other thing that really got to me about his theory was that everybody was right. It wasn't about that person's wrong or this person's not doing it right or this or that. He basically says that whatever your life conditions are, that's how you see the world. And
Yep.
so that makes everybody right. Even the people that we don't agree with what they're doing, they only know what they know. And so what can we do to help that process along? And basically what Steve and I are doing with Future Sense and with the Idea organization is, how do we improve basic life conditions on the planet for every stage of consciousness?
Mm.
And every life form for that matter, but we'll focus it on humans, because if we can start to improve life conditions a little bit for everybody, that's going to help speed up our process of development and evolution. But it also is going to help get rid of some of this baggage that we've been carrying as a species for a long time. You can't go in and say, hey, everybody that's down, that's here working at kind of what he would call stage 4, authoritarian, where we got all of our religions and our laws. You can't necessarily talk to somebody that has that point of view from an intuitive kind of systems perspective that's up here. It's not going to make any sense. They're going to think you're crazy. And so how do we start to input little bits and pieces that help the process along? That's something that everybody can grasp, but again, is improving just basic life conditions on the planet. For some people, that's having a roof over their head and just a warm meal a day. For other people, it's a little less time on their technology and more time with their friends. It's different for everyone. So I
Yeah.
really, really liked that aspect of it, though, that no one was wrong and that this isn't the right way. And that's some of the other pushback I think a lot of people get with Spiral is, well, if this is more evolved, it's better, or this is higher. Well, it's not the case. That they're all embedded within the system, and there is no right or wrong, which I really
Yeah. There's a lot of just compassion built into that,
Mm-hmm.
because you're just trying to understand why people are the way they are, not because it's good or bad, but just, this is the case. This is true. Why is it true? I think one of the tough parts is knowing that for yourself and for the people around you that you can't skip steps,
Yeah.
I think for myself, I find myself kind of I definitely feel like I understand and have enough of a, layer 7 in me to I get excited about it, and I feel like I can see the layers and stuff, but my life conditions feel very sort of like a layer 6. Like I'm really looking for community and healing and, just kind of working through old belief systems and traumas and stuff. But there's a part of me that really wishes I could just skip over it. It's like, no, I just want to go to the point where I'm cool and I can,
you are cool, man.
Yeah.
You don't have to go anywhere else. You're already there.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, so there's that. But yeah, I also find it just super, super fascinating and mind blowing. Like this past year, as I've gotten more and more into it, it resonates to the point where it's almost kind of creepy. Like it can almost kind of freak you out or kind of initiate that feeling of that you're in a simulation, because it just feels so true with everything that's going on collectively, and seeing how the individual and the collective sort of reflect in that way of how we go through the stages within our own life, but then also as a society, as a culture, we kind of also go through the same stages. But that's super exciting to me that you guys are going to be doing some stuff around that, because just for my own personal enjoyment and entertainment, but also, for anybody who there's something great about being able to turn somebody onto it who's ready to
Yeah.
hear it and also gets really excited about it. Which I'm sure
Yeah.
Steve, had that feeling of exposing you to it.
Absolutely. I'm glad he
Um,
did.
yeah. One of your other, I don't know exactly, I should know this, but I don't know exactly what your specific roles in it were because I know you were actually in the film, but I recently watched the Achuma film with
Uh-huh.
Aubrey.
Yeah.
Yeah, what did you do for that exactly? And also just like, uh, what was that like going on a trip like that with Aubrey? And I'm listen to Aubrey stuff a lot and
Okay.
appreciate his work. So I'm just curious about what that was like.
Yeah. Well, it was great. Aubrey contacted me, gosh, I guess it was back in 2013, 14, something like 2014, and just said, "Hey, I want to know what you're up to. I'm getting a group of people together. We're going down to the Amazon and we want to do some medicine and shoot something." That's all that we knew. We didn't have any plan, but we had a great group of people that were, in the film, and we went down. And so I was a director and producer on that. But we just kind of figured that one out as we went. And
Nice.
originally Aubrey said, "Hey, I want to put you in front of the camera too." And I said, "Absolutely not, man. I'm a behind the scenes guy. That's what I like to do." And after talking to him more and kind of getting what his vision was, that's where we ended up. And I was okay with that. It's kind of like, well, if I'm going to go explore this stuff, I should be able to share my experience with others and let people know what that is. And so we did the Wachuma one, and then we also, I don't know if you've seen the ayahuasca one, which is kind of a companion piece for it that we
Not
did
yet.
there. Okay,
I've got it queued up, but I
excellent.
haven't watched it yet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
so
we had a great time and wonderful people, and had a lot of fun making them. Yeah,
the Wachuma, that's San Pedro, correct?
that's correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what was that? How was that experience?
Yeah. So I had Wachuma prior to that, in a different context than what we had taken it there. It is, they call it the godfather medicine as opposed to the grandmother medicine.
Hmm.
So there's this, I think, a highly synesthetic experience where you're just tapped into nature. You can just listen and you're like, oh, that's a color, it's purple, and it's coming from 320 yards. It's like everything is so specific and kind of down to the millimeter. And then there's also the crossing of senses, that synesthetic aspect, where you hear a noise, but you hear the color, if that makes sense, or you taste what you see. And it's
Interesting.
almost like all of these things are so connected, where it just gets rid of those barriers, and you're experiencing uh, all the aspects of it in not very specific formations of thought or taste or hearing, things like that.
Yeah.
Um, and kind of tapping into, oh my gosh, I am nature. I am not separate from nature. I think a
Hmm.
lot of times humans, we think, oh, we've built ourselves out of nature and blah, blah, blah. It's the farthest thing from the truth. We are nature. We are
Yeah.
building nature. Even our cities are natural. It may seem different, but it is definitely part of a natural system.
Yeah.
And you tap into that in such a profound way, not necessarily like the visual or the visionary states that you'll get with ayahuasca or DMT. Very much a body, want to get up and move, feel, laugh even. We did a lot of laughing, which
Yeah.
is which can be really good medicine as well.
Yeah. Um, I'm curious if there's if there's something that you can share of just kind of like, I just feel like oftentimes on podcasts or social media, especially,
Mhm.
everybody wants to share like the best stuff that they're doing and their most inspirational thoughts and this and that. And I'm always just curious, like, well, especially recently because I've been going through some challenging times for the past few months, and I'm just kind of wondering, like, what are some challenges that you've been having either recently or within the past while, or just kind of what stuff, you're working through or working on and into
Sure.
just that whole side of things, if there's anything that.
Yeah. It's a great question to ask. I've had a lot of struggles in my life, and not that I'm unique, but I fought depression for my whole life. I've been up and down. I had attempted suicide when I was 18 years old. Um, so a lot of traumas that compounded and built up over time, and I dealt with those in some negative ways, and it just kind of kept building up. And it was really my return to psychedelics in my late 20s and early 30s that started to turn some of that around. And I started to focus more on healing myself with these compounds as opposed to just going and getting high. I would say probably the biggest thing after even all of these other traumas and things in my life, I lost my brother 9 years ago. From an accidental drug overdose. And he was not only my little brother, but he was my best friend. We were on his bachelor party, and I found him the next morning, unresponsive, and didn't come back. And this was right at the time when we were releasing the Spirit Molecule, and my career started to go like this, and then my personal life just collapsed in. And just recently, sometime earlier this year, in the last 6 months, I'm actually finally feeling like I'm back. What I can say was me. I feel a little bit more like myself, if you will, after that loss. And that was probably the hardest thing I've ever dealt with in my life. I thought there was a lot of other stuff prior to that that was hard and challenging, but that was the toughest. It has changed how I want to live life, how I'm living life, how I'm in relationship with the rest of the world, in relationship with myself, and how I even understand life and death has changed, even from those big experiences. I want to do something about this opioid crisis. That's one thing that is that irks me, that we are losing so many people from opiates, that even turn to heroin, but even the pharmaceutical stuff. And that's how my brother passed. And I've lost other friends from this stuff. And it's unnecessary. There are things out there that we can use to help people that are going through this. We should not shove them into the category of just being criminals. People are struggling. They don't end up there because they want to be there. That's the last fucking thing that they want.
Yeah.
And I think that as a culture, it's our responsibility to start responding a little more compassionately and also trying some things outside the box, because what we've been doing is not working. That was a long answer to get around to it, but I think that if we continue to kind of move forward, trust in the process, and be as compassionate and loving, not only to ourselves, but others around us. I know that seems a little strange and new agey, but it's like the very basic of, I think, who we are. And if we can find that little bit, that will help the process. It doesn't say that it's going to make it go away 100%. There's a part of it that we have to learn to live with and understand in a different way. But there's loss in all of our lives. I think that's the other thing I think we need to start, as particularly the Western society, talking about death more. We all know we're going there, but nobody fucking talks about it.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a very traumatic thing when it happens. And I think that's unnecessary. I think we should be talking more about this and talk about what it's like to lose somebody, or that we are ultimately going there.
Yeah.
So I also don't believe in death anymore. Death is like, it's just a transfer of energy. From my experiences with psychedelics and DMT, this is just a Passover spot, man.
Yeah, I would say that I would agree with that from what I've experienced. I appreciate you sharing that. That stuff's kind of intense. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's that sort of stuff is not talked about a lot, and I get why. You mean just challenges in general, I feel like a lot of people don't.
Right.
It's not comfortable to talk about. I mean, I think for me personally, there's been a sense of like, well, if I share it, then is it more real? If I tell somebody that I'm struggling, is it going to make me feel like I'm struggling more because I'm admitting it and I'm not just kind of like powering through it? You know what I mean? But I don't know. I've increasingly found there seems to be some real power in people sharing what what they're struggling with, what they have struggled with. Just for somebody, people to be able to relate and go like, oh, hey, Mitch had a death in his family and it was super hard, and look where he's at now. He made it through and he's got some maybe wisdom from it. And I don't know, I just think that can probably be a pretty powerful thing. But I can relate to you a lot. I haven't had a death in the family, but I've had multiple family members that have struggled for years and years with substance abuse, alcohol, and different types of drugs. And yeah, it's super challenging. And I have two brothers that I'm really close to that are like my best friends. So I can only imagine what that must be like to not only lose a brother, but to be the one to kind of like discover,
Yeah.
your own brother. But the opioid thing. Are you familiar with Gabor Mate's work? I would assume.
Yeah,
Yes.
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of his and his work, and it's one of those things where, part of me feels like it's easy to demonize people who have drug abuse problems because it hurts so much to see the reality of it. To see the fact that they're struggling so much with their own pain that they have to turn to such a devastating lifestyle.
Right.
It's easier to say like, oh, they're just a low life, or they're just choosing to be that way, blah blah blah.
Right.
Because if you're to actually look at it honestly and feel how it reflects your own pain, it's so difficult that it's just easier to kind of label it as a certain thing.
Yeah.
And the opioid thing is just so obvious. I mean, once you start kind of looking at things through that lens, that people are being addicted to things that kill pain, so
Right.
obviously they're in some type of deep pain. So you say that's something you'd love to kind of like try to help. Do you have certain like ideas or plans? Like, are you working on anything in that arena?
Not particularly right now. I think it's just a matter of just doing my day-to-day work and getting out and talking about these things. I think
Yeah.
that's important as well. Ibogaine and Iboga are amazing tools for opiate addiction or just addiction in general.
Yeah.
I've tried Ibogaine once, and it was to help snap me out of a very deep depression and kind of getting back to some of those negative thoughts of suicide. And I tell you what, man, that stuff rocketed me right out of it. It's not for everybody.
Yeah.
And you have to be very careful with who you're taking it with, where it's coming from. But I've seen addicts that come in shaken, eyes dark. 24 hours later, they're smiling and they're up walking around, not jonesing for something. And that, to me, I mean, that's one of the biggest parts. Once you get hooked on opiates and having that stuff in your system, it's a bitch to get off of. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't want to get off it because it hurts, literally, physically hurts, which is why people go back and back to it. But when you can get rid of all those withdrawal symptoms and you can help somebody that's been struggling, we should have that medicine available for anybody that needs it. Because if you start thinking about the consequences of somebody's use, what they might have to go through to get certain substances and do certain things that they not want to, but society doesn't want, but also the impact on family and friends that their use has, and then potentially even their death. We should be putting all of our resources towards helping people, because it would wipe out a lot of the other stuff that we have to deal with as a society, as the fallout from that. So,
Yeah. How much of, some of the issues we're experiencing now do you feel like a big part of it is the lack of like a real intimate connections and community?
I think we're starting to, I think people are feeling that for sure, particularly with kind of moving from this whole capitalistic state, and it's about me and I'm going to win and I'm going to kick your ass to make sure that I'm going to make more money or get the bigger car or house.
Yeah.
So that begins to feel very alienating, which starts to bring us back into what Graves would call like kind of this sixth stage, and to heal all of those previous layers of stuff.
Yeah.
And so there is that I want to connect again. And then at the same time, which is the fascinating part about Spiral as well, is all the dynamic aspects of it. So stage 5 creates certain technologies. We have the internet that's kind of blossomed out of that and even into the 6th stage. It is also connecting people more. At the same time, it's also opening up channels of others to come in and push back on that stuff. And so it's kind of making the experience of being alone or needing to connect tenfold, I think. And yeah, I think it is important that we do kind of get back into having some conversations and sitting down with family and friends, outside of, hey, how you doing? Okay, gotta go. But actually communing with them can make a big difference and can help heal that stuff from the previous layers that we've had to go through. It's not easy though.
Yeah.
Not
I think
easy.
I think that's, a big part of where I'm at in my life right now. And one of the hardest parts is like for me right now, I think is, when you kind of feel like you're cracked open and your heart's really open and you're really feeling vulnerable, the rest of the world can feel very like sharp and abrasive, because
Right.
so many people are living so protected with good reason, to just try to get through the day. And
Mm-hmm.
even with friends and family, it can be really hard to connect with people on like a vulnerable, intimate level, because people seem to live in a very protected state a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And so to find a chance to really, or to be willing to put yourself out there and kind of take that first step to try to be vulnerable with somebody and have like a deeper conversation, it can be really scary, in a lot of
Absolutely.
ways. Um,
Absolutely.
from the we're just kind of jumping around all over the
That's
place, but
fine. Yeah, that's good.
but from the looks of your website, it looks like there's just a lot of different things you kind of got in the works. Is that
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, we do. We had some stuff that right after the spirit molecule that we were trying to create a full platform that would have other documentaries that were associated with kind of different pillars of information. We weren't able to totally pull that off, but those things are still on my agenda down the road at some point.
Yeah.
And then we have these other things that are starting to go with the conscious molecule. That's really the focus right now, and future sense documentary series. Those are the pieces that we're pushing forward, and the
Cool.
things that will make the biggest impact in the world right now. So
Cool. Nice.
yeah,
Yeah, to just jump back because I just remembered something I wanted to ask you when you were kind of
sure.
talking about your brother and kind of how that has changed some of the ways you've um been kind of thinking about life and wanting to act in your life and stuff. If there are some digestible kind of like maybe insights into that, like how that stuff has changed your perspective, if you haven't already shared, like how would you put that?
Sorry, I missed part of what you asked there. What are these insights that I've gained, or how
Oh
did I go
yeah,
about that?
yeah. So no, I was just sort of saying, I'm jumping back to when you were talking about when your brother died and how over the
Mhm.
past handful of years you've kind of feel like you've maybe changed your feeling about how you want to live life, how you are living your life. Kind of
Right,
seems like there's been
right.
some perspective shifts from that, and I'm just kind of wondering,
Yeah,
more specifically what some of that stuff is, if it,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me was my relationships with my family and my friends. I'd never kind of felt like I fit in. I think I said that just a little earlier with my
Yeah.
family, and so it's also created some distance with my family. But since Matthew's death, it's been about going back and trying to find kind of a base level that we can kind of communicate on, and
Mm,
whatever that is, trying to cultivate that.
mm,
It's not always going to be what I want, but I also have to understand that it's not always about me, or it
yeah.
shouldn't be. That there are other players in this whole thing, and that also starts to give me a little perspective, not just on my own internal story, but also on where my parents might be coming from, or my sister, or my aunt, or friends, and trying to understand that their whole makeup is causing them particular things to happen, and they're responding accordingly. And so that I think just trying to, again, not only just understand my own self and my perspective, but also the others that are around me and the ones that I love, that it helps make me a little bit more compassionate person, I hope. I don't feel like I still struggle with this a little bit, but that constant like go, 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 I got to do this, I got to do this. I pulled back a lot from that. Again, I don't think it's perfect, but at the same time, I feel like it's a lot less chaotic than it used to be. And I think part of that is just saying I don't have to get it all done today. I can wait, I can let things play out, and I don't have to beat myself up for doing that. If I am walking around with my integrity as best I can and being good and towards others and even myself, and I think those things will start to fall into place. And again, that's a daily challenge and something that I'm constantly working on. But I think the two big things are those relationships, and trying to cultivate those relationships again, as well as getting out and doing stuff, but without pushing myself to collapse and then have to start all over again, which is ultimately what happens.
I can relate to all that a lot. Yeah. I feel like that's exactly sort of what a lot of my challenges have been recently is, just having a very motivated kind of feeling. I spent a lot of my life doing stuff that I wasn't really very passionate about and just kind of doing my passions as hobbies, and sort of reached this turning point around 2012 where I just flipped and I was like, you know what? I'm going after what I want,
Absolutely.
and just really started just trying super hard. And it just got to the point where I just continually was like shrinking my window of what I did with my life, to the point where it was like all I did was sit by myself and work on music and work on my podcast, and just driving myself to this isolation and like disconnection, and like feeling like the only thing that mattered was I just need to achieve this thing, and once I achieve it, then I'm going to be happy or content or whatever. And that pushing and pushing just finally breaks you down to the point where, I feel like this sense of, it can be really challenging to feel, when you're a person like, I'll just lump us into the same category, somebody who's maybe interested in more metaphysical, consciousness, all sorts of stuff, and kind of sees the world from this different perspective. That in itself can be alienating.
Oh yeah.
Depending on what your people in your life are like. And I'm lucky to have some good ones, but also at the same time, it still can be hard, and family, it can be hard to relate about certain things with family, and just it can be hard to just accept the way our culture is right now and what types of things are important to people and what they want to talk about. But I feel that feeling kind of like what you described, I think, where you feel this desire to kind of, find some foundational piece with the people in your life that you can connect on and share that like feeling of connection and love and support, just to have, because it's important for everybody. And but yeah, it's a challenge, and there is still that feeling, like with this podcast, it sort of went from this idea of like, well, I'm going to start a podcast and it can be this exciting thing, and I can be a podcaster, and it'll be like a cool thing that I can do, and people will see me as this cool thing. And within like a handful of episodes, it was like I was just breaking down to the point where I realized, like, what am I doing this for if it's not just to talk to people that I want to ask questions and I'm just interested in for myself, you know what I mean?
And that's okay.
Yeah.
That's totally cool. If that's what it is, that's what it is.
Right. And it just got to the point where, it's that feeling in life sometimes where things get broken down to the bare essentials. And it's like, if the bare essentials aren't there, then they probably aren't meant to work out, know?
Right.
And so for me, the bare essentials, like for this, is like, hey, this guy's cool. I'd like to talk to him and connect with somebody, and maybe we have some insights that we can share with each other, or with somebody else. And at the end of the day, like, that's what feels like is important. Otherwise, I would rather just go work at Home Depot or something, you know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah.
Just mindlessly do something that's not going to stress me out.
Well, and maybe it can be that that release for you. You know, it's like you said, it's not easy to have these kind of conversations with day-to-day relationships. I think for a lot of people, it's like, okay, dude, I've heard enough. Okay, great.
Yeah.
And I run into that all the time.
Yeah.
But when we can have an outlet like this and you can go get that bit out of your system, then that's a great thing. That's a wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's already kind of felt like, there's a community of people like us that connect through podcasts and various things. It's still very digital, which is still tough because it's obviously a totally different thing to meet people in person, and there's something extra valuable about that in-person connection, but it at least feels like a starting point between connecting people that, resonate with each other. So that's a positive. But what else do you I think I saw recently you and Steve are actually going to be speaking or presenting at a festival or something soon?
Yeah, we'll be at Rainbow Serpent, which is a big festival that takes place the end of January in Australia. Been there a few times before. I love it. It's absolutely amazing. And they have not just the music side of it, but they have the whole, what they call the village, where they screen, they do workshops, talks. So Steve and I will both be going to that and sharing our thoughts on what's happening in the world.
Cool.
Yeah.
What is there anything else you can think of that you want to share or have been thinking about or anything like that?
Oh, well, I'm just excited to get going on these two new projects and really kind of get back to my creative force, which I have been away from for a little while. And I miss that. That's the thing that drives me, is being able to create. And I'm really looking forward to getting going on this project with Steve, also with, the conscious molecule stuff here. And so I would just, people get ready, because here we come. You thought the spirit molecule was big, but we're gonna go tell some big stories, and I hope that everybody will tune in for that. So
I gotta ask, and you probably maybe can't share or won't want to, but could we expect Joe Rogan being involved in the next DMT documentary?
Yes, I would love to have Joe involved. I have not talked to him about this yet. Part of what I'm thinking, though, for this next one is that the host, two things, probably a female, and possibly, this is just some like early thoughts, is that I would create the host as an AI, because there's a lot of technology out there that can do that. I don't know if you saw the one that they did with Joe Rogan.
Are you talking like what do they call that?
So it's it's like a machine learning algorithm where you can feed in all of Joe's voice samples,
like deep fake kind of stuff.
Yeah, deep fake stuff. So we would make. What I was thinking on that is, well, there's a couple of people I would like to make a deep fake of, and so of course I'd have to get some permissions.
Sure.
The other part is creating a brand new.
That's interesting.
So feed in all of my interviews from the previous movie, from all the different people that we talked to, and let an AI create something out of all of those people, because it would create a new voice. It would create new ways of speaking based off of all of those people involved in that. So it's, being able to tie that in and thinking about universal consciousness. I think that AI, or I don't even like to use the word AI as artificial intelligence, because I don't think it's artificial. I think it's consciousness moving to a more complex form of being. And that gets to the whole concept of what we're doing with that next film. And so I'm hoping that we could do something fun and interesting like that for that project.
That's very interesting. I got to ask now, because now I'm just very interested what you think about all that, like deep fakes. And I mean, right now, obviously it's a little creepy because of just like, we're still in so much wrapped in this, materialistic, capitalistic kind of based society with so much fear and motivation to use propaganda and forms of control and stuff. But I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of other possibilities for that kind of technology as well.
I think there are, and I think initially we're going to see some major issues from these deep fakes. They're getting to a point now where you can generate video and create the person, not just the audio aspect of it, but make them look like they're saying what you're saying. And so when those get to a point that they look almost unrecognizable, that's going to have some implications on the world. I don't know what those are yet, but I would imagine they're not going to be all that great.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that we talk about that, yet we continue to go out and build these things that we
Right.
don't want. It's like this crazy kind of paradox that's going
It
on
is.
out there.
Yeah.
Oh, we don't want to build an AI, but we're going to keep building this shit over and over as fast as we can,
Yeah.
and we'll see what happens. So I almost feel like it's inevitable. It's built into our operating system to create these next steps. So it's just going to be a matter. I think we need to take some time to really understand what we're coding. I think some people are trying to do that. At the same time, I think it's coming. So we got to prepare ourselves in some way. We have to also understand that humans are coding this. So when an AI, quote unquote, comes out and has a bias and starts talking crap to somebody, we have to remember, well, it was coded by a human being that has biases and that has layers and layers of understanding of the world that we're trying to implementing into a software program.
Right.
So it's going to end up having those recurring loops as well because we're coding it. So, we just, I think we need to keep questioning and talking and what are the ethics around that? Because those ethics change with technology. Our ethics completely change.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of perspective. So what are those new ones and what are we walking into? And trying to minimize the damage as much as possible.
How much does it feel to you like, and this maybe is a hard concept to try to explain, but some of this stuff like, with social media and things with the internet and AI, and in a certain way, like what you're saying, how we don't want certain things of it to, certain results to come true, but yet we're just rushing towards it head on without really much thought. How much does it feel like we're just kind of subconsciously trying to amplify some of these shadow aspects maybe to the point of bringing them into consciousness so we're forced to kind of like deal with them? Does that make sense?
That makes complete sense. I think if those things are unresolved, and there are a lot of unresolved things, as you start, Graves talks about, like when you move through these different layers, and we're moving into what he would call this stage six, kind of relativistic understanding of the world, where we literally start to sense other people's feelings, if you will, so we can put ourselves in their shoes. But the backside of that is that each one of these stages goes back to the shadow side, which is 3 stages below. So we're going to be like going back and dealing with shadows from like this egocentric place where it was all about what I want, and I'll do whatever the hell I need to make sure that I get that. If that means killing, if that means raping, if that means stealing, that's what I'll do. And it was all about just the individual. And so now you come up here and we're starting to say, oh, I'm actually affecting that person over there, or I'm affecting this here. So those shadow elements are going to keep coming up until they're dealt with.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it. I think you nailed it, that once, subconsciously we keep bringing these things forward because they have not been resolved in our own psyches and in this species psyche, the collective psyche. And until those things get resolved, then we'll keep manifesting them, and so we can resolve them.
Yeah. Well, in the same kind of vein, the universal intelligence thing, it makes me think about just what are we trying to do in general with technology and stuff. And in a lot of ways, it seems like we're kind of just attempting to recreate what's already here, but maybe we don't necessarily have access to, which is like through the internet, we're attempting to create a place where we have all of the world's knowledge that can be accessed at any time. Or, through AI, we're kind of recreating our own selves. You know what I mean? It's like it's almost like we're striving, even with virtual reality, kind of striving to recreate a whole nother reality. I don't know. It's just kind of interesting to me. I don't know where I'm going with that, but I guess it just feels like there's this desire to kind of like recreate, or just yeah, like a fractal version of what reality already is. Like,
Right. Well, that's what the universe does, right? That's what DNA does.
yeah,
That's what
sure.
every other species does, is it mimics and it takes the information from the previous set of information, and it's slightly different, but it's basically the same thing, just with a different, more complex view of the world. And I think that's what we're doing with our technology. I don't think it's just us either. I think we're influenced by all these other things
Yeah.
that are out there, that I think, basically, and I'd take it even a step out, is that the Earth has said, we need more communication on this planet if you
Interesting.
guys are going to be running around doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so out of us, it emerges,
Yeah.
gives a new form of communication that now, 30 years after the internet's been created, is having some major, major impact. But I think ultimately there's going to be a lot of good that comes out of the information exchange that fast. We can learn about stuff. We can react. We can respond quicker. We can
Yeah.
talk to people in the world and have an insight into what their culture might be like as opposed to ours.
Yeah. I don't want to keep you forever, but that's interesting. I've thought about the internet in the terms of like, you know, a lot of what, psychedelics seem to do, for one thing, is break down certain, or like, remove certain boundaries temporarily. And obviously psychedelics have been not integrated into our culture for quite a long time. And it seems like in some ways the rise of the internet is almost like a collective sort of a material version, or like a societal version of some of what psychedelics do, in terms of like increased connectivity through parts of the people in different parts of the world. Like if you were to think of the world as a brain, maybe it's pulling back some of that default mode network, and it's connecting neurons in different parts, and all sorts of dark things are coming up, about people, and you see, sensationalized things on social media with, people having accounts just about butt pictures or this or that,
Right.
it just sort of seems like, it's kind of like it's like, if we're not going to be doing the inner work voluntarily through spiritual practices or plant medicines or whatever that might be, like it's going to come about in a different way, through maybe something that we create unknowingly, like the internet.
Right. I think there's a lot to that. And I think there's other layers, like when this technology is created at a, stage 5/6 or whatever, that also opens up to all the consciousness being able to participate with that technology, and they may not have the best intentions, right? So from like where it was founded from, but that is going to impact what's happening up at the other end and at the back end, this big conga line, as Steve likes to say. It's like this big conga line of change kind of going through, and there's not going to be one big awakening and everybody on the planet's, dematerialized out of their body and everything is all great. It's a change process. So yeah.
Cool, man. Well, people will be staying tuned for the next installment of the DMT documentary, I'm sure, and I'm super excited about Future Sense as well. How can people connect with you if they want to? Are you in the social media world, or?
I'm on social media. Yeah, we can. I would say I'm not on as much as I used to be, and I have somebody that really runs all my social media. But you can go to thespiritmolecule.com, connect with us there, and all of our social is on there as well. Also, my personal site is mitchschultz.net. You can connect with me on there, and please feel free to poke around. You can see all the different projects and other things that we're working on those sites. So
cool. Well, thanks for taking the time to chat with me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Maybe I'll come back and do it again next time.
Most definitely. Yeah. Anytime you got something coming up or have some interesting thoughts or whatever it might be, I'd be happy to talk to you. So.
Well, thanks for having me on and your patience for making this happen.
For sure.
All right.